So, let me tell you what came up recently on SportsCenter, because it was one of those segments that really gets people talking. The discussion turned to the Los Angeles Lakers, and of course, one of the first things that came up was the uncertainty around their backup center spot. It's no secret that the Lakers have been searching for depth at the wing position, ideally someone who fits the mold of a true 3-and-D player, but right after that, the question was raised about the center rotation. Now, Jackson Hayes is currently penciled in as the main backup, and while there was some optimism about his potential, the panel made it clear that the Lakers still don't have a fully reliable option behind Anthony Davis. Hayes has shown flashes, and when thrust into a starting role last season, he had some good moments. But let's be honest, come playoff time, coaches want someone more proven. Hayes isn't necessarily a bad option, but if the Lakers had the opportunity to bring in someone like Nick Richards, or another steady presence, that's the type of upgrade that makes a difference. Still, it's important to remember how rotations tighten up in the postseason. Anthony Davis is likely logging 35 minutes a night, sometimes even more. That leaves maybe 10 minutes for a backup, and in certain matchups, you might not even play a true center at all, instead going small and sliding another forward into the lineup. So yes, the backup center role isn't the most crucial piece, but it's one of those small details that can separate a deep playoff team from a championship team. And here's where things got really interesting. The show pointed out that the Lakers don't necessarily need to pour big money into a backup center, but if you can address that need as part of a bigger deal, you absolutely take it. For example, if you're making a trade for a versatile wing, and you can also land a solid backup center in the package, then you're checking off two boxes at once. That's been the vision in a lot of conversations surrounding LA, finding the right combination of a defensive-minded wing and a reliable big man. That's exactly why Daniel Gafford's name came up again. We've heard his name connected to the Lakers for a while now, but it's resurfaced in a big way since Dallas acquired Luka Doncic and started reshaping their roster. Gafford, who fans know as the landlord, just signed a 3-year extension with the Mavericks worth a little over $4 million, about $18 million per season. And here's the key detail. A lot of insiders believe Dallas signed him with the idea of trading him later. It wasn't just about locking him up long-term, it was about increasing his value on the market and getting more serious offers from teams like the Lakers. When Gafford's name was floated before the extension, there wasn't much traction because teams didn't know what kind of contract he'd command, and nobody wanted to give up assets for a player who might leave in free agency. Now, with his contract in place, he becomes a much more attractive trade piece. And although Dallas can't move him right away due to league rules, his situation is definitely something to monitor, especially with Anthony Davis coming off surgery for a detached retina and questions already popping up about his availability at the start of the season. The Mavericks need Gafford and Derek Lively for depth, but that hasn't stopped rumors from flying. That's what led to one of the more intriguing proposals discussed on the show. It was a 3-team framework involving the Lakers, Mavericks, and Nets. And you know, Brooklyn always seems to be in the middle of these things. They're in asset-collecting mode, stockpiling contracts and picks, while constantly floating in and out of multi-team trade talks. The structure was this. Los Angeles would land Daniel Gafford and Haywood Highsmith. That means you're filling the backup center role and also bringing in a proven 3-and-D wing who has playoff experience and defensive toughness. Dallas would get Gabe Vincent, a 2031 first-round pick from the Lakers, plus a 2026 pick swap. And Brooklyn, in classic Nets fashion, would take on Dalton Neck, Jackson Hayes, and a 2030 second-round pick from Dallas. That was the starting point of the conversation, and it raised plenty of debate on the panel about whether the Lakers should go all in on this type of deal. All right, so let's break down how this trade would actually shake out, because the numbers and the logistics were a big part of the discussion on SportsCenter. Essentially, Dallas would be shipping out Daniel Gafford along with a second-round pick. The Lakers, on the other hand, would be sending out Gabe Vincent, a first-round pick, a pick swap, Dalton Knecht, and Jackson Hayes. Then Brooklyn would be sending Haywood Highsmith over to LA. So you immediately see there's a lot of moving parts here, a lot of pieces shifting between three teams, which is classic in these kind of multi-team trade talks. Now, when you start looking at the salaries, it gets even more interesting. Gabe Vincent is making about $11, $5 million, Jackson Hayes around $2 to $2.5 million, which brings the Lakers' outgoing salary to roughly $13 to $14 million. Dalton Knecht adds another $18 million into the mix. So, on paper, it roughly balances out, but the big question that the analysts raised is whether this actually fills out the roster spot efficiently. Because you're sending out 3 players to bring in 2. There might need to be a little retooling here, maybe a tweak somewhere, but the concept is intriguing. Here's the crux of the argument. Would the Lakers be willing to give up a first-round pick and a pick swap just for Daniel Gafford, knowing that the backup center role is important but not critical? The consensus on the show seemed to be maybe not just for Gafford alone. The value proposition makes more sense when you consider that you're getting long-term insurance behind Anthony Davis. There was a lot of talk about the what-if scenarios. What if DeAndre Ayton doesn't work out for you? Or what if he excels but then gets offered a contract that's way too rich for your cap? Gafford provides that safety net. He's locked in for 3 years, and he's versatile enough to slot into that backup role while also having the potential to start if needed. Then there's Haywood Highsmith. The panel was very clear that bringing him in immediately improves the rotation. He's a true 3-and-D player, bigger, longer, and more experienced than someone like Gabe Vincent in that type of role. He fits seamlessly into the Lakers' system, which is exactly what you want for a team with championship aspiration. Essentially, by acquiring both Gafford and Highsmith, you are solving 2 major roster issues in one move. You still have Rui Hachimura for depth, and while Dalton Knecht and some picks go out, the upside seems significant. The discussion then explored hypothetical scenarios. What if the Lakers could combine this package with an Andrew Wiggins trade? The panel laid it out. Imagine Gafford as your backup center, Highsmith as your 3-and-D wing, and Wiggins as that additional versatile scorer. Add in the possibility of filling remaining roster spots with someone like DeAnthony Melton, and suddenly you're staring at a lineup that's legitimately built to compete for a championship. One of the analysts even said if you can get all 3, Gafford, Highsmith, and Wiggins, healthy, the Lakers aren't just contenders for 1 year. They could be hoisting the Larry O'Brien Trophy and potentially repeating depending on how long LeBron stays in peak form. Of course, there were also cautionary notes on the show. Some argued this might be a bit of an overpay because Dallas gave up a first to get Gafford initially and would want to recoup that value. The panel pointed out that just because Dallas made that decision doesn't automatically mean LA should pay a similar price. Solving the backup center problem is valuable, yes, but is it the most efficient use of first-round assets? That was a key question. It really comes down to how much the Lakers value long-term security versus flexibility for other moves. So, in short, the Sports Center segment laid out the logic, the numbers, and the hypothetical scenarios, and it made for a really fun discussion. Could the Lakers actually pull this off at the trade deadline? It's complicated, but from a strategic standpoint, getting both Gafford and Highsmith addresses 2 key weaknesses in one fell swoop. And if you could somehow add Wiggins on top of that, you're looking at a roster that's not just playoff ready. It's built to compete for a title right now. Now, when we break down the final part of this discussion, it really comes down to the big picture strategy for the Lakers. You know, the big question the Sports Center panel kept circling back to was, is Daniel Gafford really the best allocation of resources at $18 million a year for a backup center? And I get it. On paper, he's a versatile player, someone who could be a long-term piece. But realistically, if DeAndre Ayton pans out, how many minutes is Gafford really going to see? You're paying a guy top-tier backup money, and you start thinking, is that the most efficient way to spend your cap space? One analyst made a really interesting point. You could potentially get 2 solid backups for the price of Daniel Gafford. That alone sparks a lot of debate, because while adding Highsmith and Gafford does give you depth, The price might be a bit steep for what is essentially a role that Jackson Hayes can handle just fine. Hayes had a strong showing as a backup last year. Sure, Gafford might be a slightly better player on paper, but when it comes to minutes, role, opportunity, and production, Hayes is already serviceable. The Lakers have built-in flexibility. Some nights, Hayes might even DNP because you're running 8 and heavy minutes or small ball lineups, and that's perfectly fine. You can't really do that with an $18 million Gafford. He needs to be on the floor to justify that salary. The panel also emphasized the timing of this potential trade. If the Lakers manage to secure Andrew Wiggins before the season or by training camp, that could change the calculus entirely. With Wiggins locked in, adding Gafford and Highsmith could be the perfect cherry on top. Suddenly, you've got a backup center who can start if needed, a 3-and-D wing who fits seamlessly into your rotation, and a versatile scorer in Wiggins. That's a combination that elevates the ceiling of this roster tremendously, potentially turning them into legitimate championship favorites. Of course, there's the cautionary side. Some experts noted that giving up a first-round pick and a pick swap might be an overpay, especially if Hayes proves himself healthy and capable. But the counterpoint? If the difference between hoisting the Larry O'Brien Trophy and an early-round playoff exit comes down to having Gafford and Highsmith, then the trade could make sense. It's all about weighing immediate championship potential against long-term asset management. So the conclusion on SportsCenter was essentially this. If the opportunity presents itself reasonably, and especially if Andrew Wiggins is already in the fold, pulling the trigger on Gafford and Highsmith might be too good to pass up. The Lakers could instantly improve depth at 2 critical positions and give themselves a legitimate shot at contending, maybe even repeating as champions depending on health and chemistry. If they wait too long or hesitate, they risk losing a chance to add significant pieces to an already talented roster. Anyway, that's the conversation they had on SportsCenter, and it's really fascinating to think about the domino effect this kind of trade could have on the Lakers' season. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think? Are you all in on the idea, against it, or somewhere in the middle? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that like button. It really helps me continue making content like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown. Appreciate all of you, and I'll see you in the next one.